2 weeks ago, the President of the United States hosted a human named Dylan Mulvaney to the White House. Mulvaney is a TikTok star and former actor who starred in Book of Mormon. Nobody had heard of any of this until about March 2020, when Dylan Mulvaney decided that he was actually a woman. Now he has about 8 million followers on TikTok, was featured by Forbes at their Power Women's Summit, and has a series of contracts with makeup companies, including ad deals with CeraVe, MAC, Neutrogena, and Kate Spade. That's right, men are so unbelievable at being women that one can say he is a woman and become one of the most influential women in America in just 6 months of wearing dresses and ironing his hair. The patriarchy always wins, gang. So, this person, this fellow Mulvaney, he began to document his attempt to become a woman in a series that he dubbed Days of Girlhood. Day 1 featured Mulvaney explaining that he had cried 3 times, had told someone he was fine when he wasn't, and had ordered clothes that had cost too much money. All hallmarks of being a girl, according to him. It's not sexist at all if he says it. That's just what being a woman is, right? Crying too much and fibbing to your friends and spending too much money on clothes. That's what women do. See, if I say that, that's an ugly stereotype about women. But if I say I'm a woman, then I have the authority to speak about these ugly stereotypes and pretend that they actually apply. Other days featured Mulvaney, who is the most female of all females, jabbering about the size of his nipples, which have been changed by estrogen shots. Spoiler alert, they are allegedly, according to him, pepperoni-sized. I wish I were kidding. I am not. And also talking about normalizing his crotch bulge in tight pleather shorts. Because, as we all know from all of our professors, some women have penises, and we all must acknowledge this simple fact. It's a lot of heroism. A lot of heroism. Not all heroes tuck. So, naturally, Joe Biden, the President of the United States, the most powerful person on President's earth, brought Mulvaney to the White House to interview him. Biden doesn't do interviews with actual members of the media who might ask him questions, forcing him to use what is left of his brain. But he does do interviews with men who believe they are women. So Mulvaney donned a trans-colored pantsuit, I'm not kidding you, and sat across from the president, and he asked the president, quote, "Do you think states should have the right to ban gender-affirming health care?" Now, for those who don't know, gender-affirming healthcare is a euphemistic misnomer for a series of medical interventions ranging from social transition, where everybody pretends that you're a member of the sex that you claim membership to cross-sex hormones, which would be shooting kids who are boys full of estrogen or girls with testosterone, to mutilation and sterilization surgically, ranging from breast removals and phalloplasties in girls to vaginoplasties in boys. So Joe Biden responded to this question, quote, "I don't think any state or anybody should have the right to do that. As a moral question and as a legal question, I think it is just wrong. It is morally wrong to prevent minors from getting these sorts of quote-unquote treatments." So, assume for a second that the President of the United States, his brain is not complete applesauce at this point, so we have to ask a question. How did one of the 2 major parties in the United States, the entirety of the legacy media, all of academia, and nearly all of corporate America come to believe that transing the children isn't just something that some people could do, it is a moral necessity, that an attempt to stop it is some sort of moral wrong? Well, the transing of the kids has become the latest symptom of a far deeper and more profound evil in Western civilization. That evil is the broad redefinition of Western identity as a whole around subjective sexual feeling. See, traditional morality sees identity in a different way. Traditionally moral people see identity as a symbiotic relationship between the individual and society, or a mix of biology and the institutions that shape us. Identity lies between those 2 things. This is why the goal of parenting is to civilize your child. Your child is a bag of emotions. I have 3 of them. They're bags of biological-driven emotions. Okay, they don't have what we would call in Hebrew seichel. They don't have common sense. They have not been civilized, and your job is to get them used to the institutions of civilization so they can interact well with the world. Philosopher Carl Trueman of the University of Utah writes, "It is in communal activities that individuals find their true selves. The true self in traditional cultures is therefore something that is given and learned, not something the individual creates for himself." Today, Western morality has utterly discarded this idea. Who we are is not a question of society or institutions or roles. Instead, who we are is a question of internal feeling alone. Any societal force, any institution that crimps how we feel is bad, oppressive, and ought to be destroyed. Civilization is an institution and an imposition. Institutions are impositions, and therefore they must be destroyed. As Truman explains, the intuitive moral structure of our modern social imaginary prioritizes victimhood, sees selfhood in psychological terms, regards traditional sexual codes as oppressive and life-denying, and places a premium on the individual's right to define his or her own existence. And the refusal by any individual to recognize an identity society at large recognizes as legitimate is a moral offense, not simply a matter of indifference. You're expected to celebrate everybody's identity, right? Because their identity is how they feel. Now, this redefinition of identity is really, really irrational because it presumes that who you are is your passions, and that true happiness is to be found in the evisceration of all the institutions that allow you to live successfully in the world. This has a long history. Percy Shelley, husband of Mary Shelley and dissolute poet, wrote, quote, "In fact, religion and morality as they now stand compose a practical code of misery and servitude. The genius of human happiness must tear every leaf from the accursed book of God ere man can read the inscription on his heart." This particular belief system, that sexual passions are the root of who we are, it's not really progressive in any sense. It doesn't progress humanity. Instead, it's a call to return to the animal. A far more accurate ideological label, and one I've started to use, is transgressive. This philosophy of identity revolves around a program of norm violation, of destroying boundaries and rules and social acceptability, all in the name of liberating the passions. Now, transgressivism does result in deep unhappiness because, after all, we are far more than just whatever we feel like sexually that day. We are embedded beings. We are embedded in time. We are embedded in society. We are embedded into our families. If you remove all of those connections, it leaves people completely aimless. What's more, if you link sexual desires with identity, that's the only part of you that matters, it dispenses with the other aspects of individuality that comprise most of who we are. Freedom of action, reason, our sympathies with other people. If all you are is a Freudian sex impulse, then you really aren't a person, you're just a Freudian sex impulse. We are more than that. But transgressivism rejects all of that. Transgressivism treats both behavior and desire as immutable characteristics, like race or sex, thus removing freedom and responsibility. So, what exactly changed? How did we get to this point where we discarded the traditional view of what identity was, right? Your interaction with the world, your movement into roles that make you a better and more fulfilled human being. How did we discard that in favor of this newfangled transgressive identity? Well, the truth is that historically speaking, the new version of identity would have failed because it runs directly contrary to reality. Men who believe they are women, this would be laughed at in most of the world today, let alone throughout history. Men and women who choose alternative lifestyles directed at sexual pleasure rather than reproduction or relationships or roles. Human beings who define themselves primarily in terms of sexual desires, all of this would have failed, historically speaking. But over the course of the 20th century, traditional morality was largely obliterated for three specific reasons. First, religious practice in the West markedly declined. Religion has been, for all of recorded history, societal glue. As religion declines, so too does the moral and social immune system of a society. Religion allows us a shared moral system, principles that create a backdrop of philosophical homogeneity that allow for the weaving of a social fabric. Second, the advance of science and the welfare state lured the West into a false sense of security, a sense that the link between action and consequence had been completely severed. Birth control meant that sex was now completely disconnected from the results of sex for literally all of mammalian history. And then welfare meant that you didn't actually have to pay the consequences of your own action, all of which resulted in incentivization of exactly the sorts of behavior that heretofore had been disincentivized by reality. Third, thanks to the decline in religious practice and the advance of birth control and welfarism, we entered a realm of what I would call pseudo-rationalism. This is a philosophy that suggests that all human behaviors and social rules have to be justified in some way, tabula rasa, via secular humanism. So you can't just hear a bad idea like men can be women and just laugh at that and say that's silly. There's no reason to believe that. Instead, you now have to construct an argument as to why men cannot be women. And if you fail to construct this argument, we have to change society overnight. Now, the reality is the way that most of us interact with the world is that we receive wisdom from our parents, from the society around us. This is a form of data. Thomas Sowell has pointed this out. If wisdom has been tested over the course of thousands of years and found to be durable, discarding that for no apparent reason would be an incredibly stupid thing to do. But we as a society have decided that it's no longer okay to simply point at tradition or point at traditional wisdom. Instead, we have to come up with some sort of logic as to why that works. It shifts the burden of proof, modern society, away from the people who wish to tear down these institutions and onto the people who wish to defend these institutions. The result of this is that now in the West, there are really only a couple of values that remain: Jonathan Haidt, the sociologist, points this out. He says there are a couple of values that are left: harm and fairness, right? Are you harming somebody, and is it fair? These are the only two things that seem to matter to the modern individual. Other values that conservatives have traditionally prized, like loyalty or respect for authority or purity, these have all been discarded. Haidt writes in the great book that you should read called The Righteous Mind, Westerners will now defend pretty much anything, up to and including the right of a man to buy a chicken at the supermarket and have sex with it. He says, quote, if you're an educated and politically liberal Westerner, you'll probably give another nuanced answer, one that acknowledges the man's right to do what he wants as long as he doesn't hurt anyone. Here's the thing, though. Jonathan Haidt doesn't actually go far enough. In our society, we no longer ask if it's okay for a man to go down to the supermarket, buy a frozen chicken, and have sex with it. We don't ask if it's okay. We say that that's now an identity. And if you say that it's bad, there is something morally wrong with you. That being a chicken copulator is a form of who you are. And if anybody says differently, if anybody says that this is bad or wrong, this means that they are some sort of bigot. Well, if this is what transgressivism pushes, this idea that everything that has made human beings traditionally, that all of the things that make people feel embedded and whole and fulfilled need to be discarded, how exactly was this crammed down not only on society, but especially on children, and why on children? Well, back in July of 2021, there was a video that was released by the San Francisco Gay Men's Chorus. The chorus has a mission, according to its website. We evolve society's views toward LGBTQ people through our commitment to excellence. This commitment to excellence caused them to release a video. It was a song called Message from the Gay Community, and the lyrics went something like this. You think that we'll corrupt your kids if our agenda goes unchecked. Honey, just this once, you're correct. We'll convert your children, happens bit by bit, quietly and subtly, and you will barely notice it. We'll convert your children, we'll make them tolerant and fair. We're coming for them, we're coming for your children. There's not a lot of question that transgressivism targets kids. They have to, because here's the thing. If you wish to construct a society that hates all the institutions, you have to start with a crowd of people who haven't been shaped and molded by the institutions. Right? All of the people in this room, you're all adults. This means that you've been shaped and molded by institutions. You may have some pre-existing notions of what right and wrong constitute, what's good and bad. But if you start with the kids and you blow up the institutions for the kids, you can shape them in whatever direction you want. And the transgressives are not hiding the ball in this particular respect. They actually believe they're doing a favor to kids. They're liberating the kids. Because after all, if you get rid of all these institutions, kids can lead more fulfilled, fluid, happy lives. The most obvious manifestation of this, which we've seen pretty much all over the United States, is Drag Queen Story Hour or family-friendly drag shows across the country. Why is this happening? Well, the answer is, again, it is promotion of transgressivism. Drag is by necessity and by definition transgressive. It's about violating rules. Targeting this message toward kids is seen, apparently, as a good thing, because drag is a way of broadening minds or blurring boundaries. The Drag Queen Story Hour organization itself argues such events are necessary in order to allow kids to, quote, see people who defy rigid gender restrictions and imagine a world where everyone can be their authentic selves. And this is the mode of pure transgressivism. Your authentic self lies in your subjective sense of what you are, unshaped by any institutions, and we will show you a bunch of men twerking in front of you dressed as women in order to help you destroy those institutions. Now, in reality, all this stuff is incredibly dangerous for kids. Kids require stability. Kids require rules. Kids require institutions. Kids require the teaching of traditional wisdom. Kids do not require men dressed in thongs twerking in their face. So then we have to ask another question, which is, how did so many parents buy into this? How have so many adults bought into the idea that all of this is okay for kids? Because this is a pretty predominant view in large segments of this country now. Well, the answer is sticks and carrots. So the media and social media provide the carrot. They treat transgenderism as uniquely strong and heroic. As Joe Biden put it, quote, transgender people are some of the bravest people in our nation. Some of the bravest, like the people storming the beaches in Normandy or something. The media like to feature trans kids and suggest that these are heroic people who are standing for their authentic selves. And by the way, the best parents are the ones who have the trans kids. The best parents are people who allow their children to be who they authentically are, meaning parents who tell their kids they're not who they authentically are, like in their own sex. They're actually a member of the opposite sex. And the sooner they socially transition, the more authentic they are. This message tends to resonate with particular groups of people. Bill Maher correctly pointed out that this is a social contagion and it is taking place specifically in blue areas. If you go to red areas, you will find virtually no quote-unquote trans kids. If you go to blue areas, it's very difficult to find a school where there aren't multiple trans kids. That is not because of biology suddenly bottlenecking in Los Angeles or in Austin. It is because there is a social contagion that is happening right now across this country.